Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey, welcome to the first episode of Mastermind for the Masses. We're here to talk about how we can really benefit from each other's points of view and how we can collaborate together. And so we're going to kick things off. And Shan, obviously you're a serial entrepreneur, and I just want to maybe pick your brain right off the bat. Where have you seen value come from by collaborating with different people and talking through ideas?
Yeah. Well, the serial entrepreneur, I'd weigh in on that, but I like to think of it more as a way to monetize your free time. But in terms of like collaboration, I really think it depends on the specific person and what their methods are for really kind of one for communication, and then two, like just what they prefer to do, right? So like in a collaborative space like this, where we're talking on a podcast and kind of just discuss the way we kind of do things, that might make sense for a lot of people who are oriented our way. But at the same time, you have others who are the exact opposite and rather keep it like more omnidirect. So like whether it be like just chatting through text or email, or not really being an extrovert with the way they collaborate. So that's just really kind of my perspective. No uniformity works when it comes to collaboration. And you guys might notice that yourself in your professions too. I'm curious to know what Colby thinks too, what his answer is, so I can compare it to later.
Yeah, no, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I guess like collaboration is it's a very like interesting sort of area to dive into, and I think for a couple reasons, like you mentioned, it's just you get to work with such a wide variety of people, and you don't really always get to control all the variables of like maybe you don't control who's hired all the time within a company, and sometimes like you have certain options available to you, and that's like not neither good nor bad. Like it kind of like is. And I think the interesting part about collaborating as an individual coming into the space is figuring out how you fit into the mold or like fit into the group that you're joining in a way that's going to be productive professionally, engaging socially with your coworkers and kind of like stimulating that environment that you want to create. Whether it's like you come in and you're like, man, I think like we could do this better within our group, or maybe we could like in a social perspective, like with how we all interact with each other, or maybe like we're just not getting enough done professionally. So maybe we should like consider how we structure our working relationships. And I think that's where it starts to get like really interesting to me, honestly, is those two pieces, because humans are just like super dynamic, and how you like it's just like random ingredients get thrown into a pot and you kind of like see what emerges, except you get like a bit more culinary control over the result.
And I love that analogy, comparing it to like a culinary recipe, because it is, depending on the ingredients, whatever comes out, it's amazing. Even if you happen to be watching this podcast on video right now, right, even the backgrounds we chose, there's differences here, so like there's a lot of benefits from seeing the different points of view. And I think you nailed that perfectly, both of you, but especially love the analogy about cooking. But, when you think about the ingredients, right, and kind of building on what you talked about, Colby, you're making this fantastic meal, but then what happens if you accidentally like add too much salt, right? Or the wrong ingredient gets in there? Are there challenges with collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, I think there's often, I feel like people, at least my like perspective on it is that a lot of people I feel like run into a lot of challenges, and I feel like the issue they have with collaboration is not understanding how to deal with conflict or challenges while collaborating, because either it's like maybe they're too shy and they don't know how to approach a difficult conversation with a person that they're working with, but that needs to happen. And honestly, I feel like that's usually like a big thing when collaborating, is just, yeah, you could have like too much of an element and it causes an issue within that group or that team. And figuring out the most elegant solution to that issue is, really, really complicated and really hard, obviously, because it depends on the people and the content involved.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Depending on the person, the approach has to differ. I'm just trying to think of like a situation that I've experienced, and where this could really be applied. I think back over the years, and I've definitely had some people I loved working with that, when we got together, we made a great meal, if you will, right? Going back to that analogy. But then there were some that I definitely wouldn't want to eat again, and be completely honest. Shan, any experience with, a difficult situation, and maybe like how you had to kind of address something like that?
Well, I was actually going to take another tackle on your analogy that you created, Colby.
Yeah.
So you might have all the ingredients, or you might have a plan, but like, what about the chef? And what I would think when like my mind goes towards the chef, who drives collaboration, because that could mean everything too. Like you could have an environment, and I'm sure we've all been in this situation where things are just kind of dry or awkward or quiet, and then you have that kind of person who comes in and stirs up conversation. They stir up maybe like a positive mindset or an environment, and then just kind of create a wake that starts collaboration and makes people want to start chatting more, and just kind of drives more of that cook as a chef, is the best way I could put it. So like, I'm not perfect at analogies, but as soon as you came up with it, Colby, that's the first thing I could think is I might be in an environment where I'm not talking to anyone. It's quiet. There's a couple of things I'm thinking about, or maybe that I want to bring up later when I get an opportunity to, but then that right person comes in the room and kind of like just sparks conversation, and at the same time influences collaboration.
Man,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, you nailed it, Shan. I mean, just thinking, right? Like, you can't just have great ingredients, because great ingredients by themselves aren't going to produce anything, right? And so you need that chef or that leader in that role, or somebody that's kind of driving the recipe. But it's awesome too, because like, if you take that analogy even farther, right, from where you went, you've got your chef, you got your sous chef, you got, the person who's ordering the food and getting it in, and then you've got your delivery folks taking the orders, taking it to the table. Like, it really does take, an entire kitchen to produce a meal that you want to have over and over again. And that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, it's very dynamic too. So like, let's say you have a 5-star chef and terrible ingredients, you can still make a pretty good meal.
That is true.
The opposite, right? If like maybe your chef is kind of subpar, but you have the best of the best ingredients and quality food. So honestly, you could get the same result.
Yeah. So it definitely seems like a combination of things to have that recipe for success. Colby, what were you about to add in there, man?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I mean, to that point, like, because those are really good points about it, and I definitely definitely feel it really resonated with me when you brought up like the chef part, and like kind of like that's that leadership part of the group that you're involved with and helping to steer that collaborative effort. And I was honestly just really curious, Josh, because I know you've had a lot of experience at hiring people, and obviously like that's kind of like the selecting the ingredients part, right? Except very little, honestly, a lot of the times about the person that you're interviewing. And I feel like that's such a incredibly hard skill to do. Like, interviewing is a skill set, and it's really hard to master because you actually don't even get to have that much practice with it outside of the times where you need to use it. So it's a pretty honestly strange dynamic sometimes, both from the person that you're interviewing and you yourself doing the process. So what would you say is are the maybe the top 3 critical things that you need to either look for, or even just kind of talk about during interview to make sure that you are selecting the right person?
Man, that is such a good question, right? And when I think about it, just because I love the analogy so much, right? I'm like at the grocery store picking out the best vegetables. Right? This is basically what you're asking. So, I mean, first and foremost, right? There has to be kind of, will this person fit within the culture of the team, right? There's a lot of technical skills or how to do a job that you can kind of train someone on, but are they going to create conflict, right? Are they not the right ingredient for the recipe, if you will? And if they're not, that's okay. And honestly, you'd be doing them a disservice to bring them aboard if they're not going to be a good culture fit, because hopefully even during that interview process, at least from my perspective, I'm still trying to figure out what the person across the table from me wants to do with their life, as much as I can tell in that 30 minutes to an hour that I'm talking with them, so that I can make sure that anything that I'm offering them aligns with that. Because if it doesn't, it's not the right fit for them either. And over the long term, they're not going to be happy. So the first thing I'm trying to do is really understand if this person is going to, help make the dish better. Right. And I'm going to stick with this analogy, Colby. I love it that much. So is the person going to make the dish better? And secondly, right, depending on the role, I do need to make sure that the capability and skill set is at least on par with the needs at the moment. So if I don't have a critical need, but the person seems to have the aptitude for it, I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk on that if I feel like they can do the job. But if, for instance, the office was really struggling and they needed someone with a high level of skill right then to make that impact, then I'm looking for that. Now, if I meet someone that's great, has the aptitude, but doesn't have the skill level right now, I may log them away for the future when I don't have the immediate need, right? So the skill and technical ability or capability around the tasks at hand, that's something I'm looking for. So culture fit first, will they get along with the team? Then can they do the job quickly and well? Like how long will that acclimation period take? And then, the kind of the third element, I think, is, will this, again, I'm going to pop back to your analogy, will the addition of this person make that meal better, right? Will it make that final product better? Because you can have someone that will fit in with the team and has a great skill set, but maybe it's not what your team needs at the moment, right? And you might be lacking project management skills. You might be lacking a technical resource. You might be lacking just someone to do clerical work. And even though you might get somebody that would be fantastic in one of those areas, if that's not the need at the moment to really complete the dish, then that's not the right fit either. So I'd say those are kind of like the three things that I'm looking for when I'm doing an interview is, are you going to get along well with the team? Can you do the job in the way that we need it today? And are you going to ultimately add value to the finished product, right? Based on our current needs. So I may hire someone this time that I wouldn't hire next time, and vice versa, based on what we need at that moment.
That's really interesting. I mean, just because I'm thinking about it from the opposite perspective too, of what I have generally done during interviews and what I imagine a lot of other people have done, and like what they think they need to do to be successful at, marketing themselves essentially on either their resume or in the interview itself. And I feel like, at least in my perspective, and I'm not sure how you guys have felt in the past or what you've noticed with other people, is they feel like they really need to make sure that they get across the skill set portion, right? And they really, really, really heavily stress that. But then I almost feel like they're very hesitant to necessarily show or just generally articulate their kind of like social nature, how they're kind of like cultural fit, right? Like they're afraid to be an ingredient almost, right? They don't want they don't want to just be salt. They want to be any ingredient that you need, especially if they want the job, because they want the job, right? They'll be like, I'll fit in wherever you need me, right?
Yeah.
But it's really hard to commit to that, right? Because like it takes a lot of guts to do that in an interview process, because you could completely bomb the interview, right? Yeah. Like you could completely like say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and they're gonna be like, yeah, like this isn't gonna work, right? So it's really interesting to like kind of hear that side, because I have not really done any hiring decisions like whatsoever, and I've always wondered like what I would prioritize. And one of the things I've definitely noticed with you, Josh, is that you seem to have been really successful in that area, and to hear that it like kind of like was what I thought in terms of like culture is like super interesting to hear, just because of like I said, that other dynamic.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing to that, right? Because you're right. The interview process can be like scary, especially when you're on that side of the table. But one of the things I always try to do right off the bat is disarm the situation, right? You guys know me pretty well, and there's definitely not a corny joke that I can't tell, right? So like I'll throw it out there and make myself almost seem less threatening or less intimidating because I just said like a really corny joke. Now, some people would be worried about that, like discrediting them. But what I'm trying to do is really kind of let that person know that, hey, we're both humans. We're both here to have a conversation. There's no reason for you to stress. Like, the literal worst thing I can do to you is tell you no, and you may really want this job. But at the end of the day, right, we're going to try to find the best fit. So let's collaborate. Let's see if this is a good fit.
Some double-sided value there. Like in reality, you're trying to diffuse the situation and make it more comfortable for the interviewee, but at the same time, you're also trying to get through the nerves so you can actually find out who this person's all about, what their skill level is, and how well they can kind of present themselves in a situation where it's not like an evaluation.
Yeah.
So that is kind of like, it's interesting you say that, and you think about the value that kind of goes like hand in hand with that. And what Colby said earlier as well, when he mentioned like kind of everyone doesn't want to be one specific ingredient, that resonated so heavy with me because in the amount of interviews I've sat in, like I definitely wanted to be every ingredient. And like
Shan's Old Spice.
Well, when you think of it like the other way around, which unfortunately most people don't, whatever they're looking for, and generally it's pretty centralized. Like if someone they're looking to add value to their team, like it's not necessarily like a well-rounded value. It's more like they're looking for a specific skill set, or they have a specific task at hand. And if that person can kind of sell that and put 80% of the effort there instead of 100% effort in being well-rounded, you'll probably get a lot further in an interview. But that's crazy that you said that, Colby, because I can honestly say that until we talk about it right now, I never really take that in mind before an interview.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, same here. Like, I mean, I just like literally thought of it right this second as Josh was saying that, because I'm just like, man, like, why haven't I ever just tried to, like, everyone always says just be natural, be yourself, but like it's so hard to do that because, right, like a lot of the times when you're looking for a job, it's not always like you're not in the spot where it's like, oh, it's okay if I don't get it. It's like, no, like when I needed a job, I needed a job. So right. It's like a mix of like, yeah, I want to find the right place, but at the same time, I really need to find a place to work and make money, get experience, all that sort of stuff. So right. I think it also is just, it can be hard to do depending on where you're at in life and what your journey looks like.
And that's true. And you said something a minute ago that I think resonated a lot with me, right? So you said, you've focused a lot on skills. And that's going to come up probably during the conversation. But I'll tell you, most of the time, I already have a pretty good understanding of what your skills are because you've given me that paper resume. What that paper resume doesn't tell me is what is different about Colby? What is different about Shan? Like, what's the differentiator, right? Because the differentiator is what drives us to these recipes. Like, if we go back to the recipes for a minute, right? You can get a burger from Wendy's. You can get it from Burger King. You can get it from McDonald's, Arby's. You can pick any fast food place to get a burger, or you can go to a sit-down restaurant and get a burger. But what is it that makes you pick the place that you pick, right? It's not the technical aspects of that construction of the burger, right? It's not the fact that there's 2 pieces of bread and a piece of meat. Boom, that's everywhere. But what is it that makes that different? And that's what I think as an interviewer, I'm looking for.
You turned our beautiful meal into a fast food passport.
No. You just need a burger, man, a burger and a beer, and you're good to go.
Well, what you're saying though is if someone with the whole differentiator portion, obviously you're not going to add yellow onions if you add white onions. I mean, maybe in some recipes you would, but if you don't have something that kind of separates them apart, you don't have as much value or taste in our analogy. So that's a good point too.
Yeah. And what's really cool, right, is, and I think it's important for people to realize, is just because you aren't selected for this meal doesn't mean you don't fit great into another meal, right? Like, it's the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
you can get really disappointed and discouraged sometimes when you're going through the interview process and you're not getting selected, and you start to think like, what's wrong with me? Well, nothing, right? Because maybe this is the burger that's at, the fast food chain, and this is the Wagyu beef burger over here with truffles, right? And like, depending on what role you're trying to fill and in what capacity, the needs are different. And so, you just have to find the right meal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of that too just stems from, having confidence within yourself, right? And knowing your value. And I think it's just that unfortunately people just aren't used to being rejected over and over again during a process like that. And so it's, you almost have to like go through it to then, develop the confidence to have that. What were you going to say, Shan?
I was actually going to put Josh on the spot again, because kind of going back to our theme.
Like that.
Yeah, 100%. Going back to our theme for collaboration and still sticking to kind of your general question about interviews. So how do you test that? Because that's tough on a one-on-one. You're sitting with someone in the room. It doesn't matter if you can diffuse the situation. How can you tell how they're going to collaborate within like a large team, a small team, or like whether even if they're going to have a different personality as soon as they walk out of that room? That's an interesting.
Yeah. So this may sound a little counter, right? Because I know I just said, so first I diffuse the situation so they feel comfortable. And that's definitely something that I do. But then, throughout the interview, I may actually ask questions to try and draw that out, right? I've asked some really weird questions before, right? Like, how many tennis balls fit in a limousine, right? And at first you go, well, that's kind of obnoxious. Why would you even ask that question, right? Or things like that. But the reality is it starts to get you to understand who that person is, right? Because they have a couple of different ways to respond to that. They can say, that's a dumb question, which, may be valid, but nonetheless, that can be the response. Or they can start, or you can see if their mind's a little more analytical, right? Because not all limousines are the same size. You've got your Hummer limousines, you got your standard limo, right? And so you start to think about different aspects. So are they someone that sees things from different angles? And it really comes down to knowing your team right now. And if you understand your team and the dynamics of your team, it's usually pretty easy to be able to pull out whether or not this person shares some of those same dynamics, right? The other thing I think is super valuable, and I know you guys have heard me say this, right? I joke around about, like, I'm kind of more of, let's do this since we're going to stick with our cooking analogies, right? I'm more of like the meat tenderizer. So I'm like the mallet, right? That goes in, I'm going to get the big stuff done. But so because of that, right, and I'm going to make sure things get done, I need to surround myself with people that are more like the paring knives, right? I'm going to do that fine work and make sure that the meal is actually done up in a palatable way. Right? I'm not good at the aesthetics and the fine detail work a lot of the time. I'm more of a big picture, like, get stuff done. So I know that about myself. And so I try to find folks that can, basically cover those gaps for me, right? Because it's not a strength of mine. What I am good at, I'm really good at. And what I'm not, right? So I need to rely on other people that have those strengths. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of where we wound up.
No, it did. It did, and it's tough, right? Like, it's tough to see how someone would collaborate in an environment where they don't have to collaborate. So, like kind of pushing questions that inspire collaboration. It makes a lot of sense. But are you ever put in any situations where you can kind of force collaboration? Because that's another thing too, and that might be what is valuable to any viewers here who might not be in a collaborative environment. I mean, we live in a world where you're working remote. A good portion of the time, or you're doing a lot of independent project work. How do you force collaboration when it might not even be seemed like as necessary?
And that is a great question, right? Before I jump in, Colby, I'd love to hear your thoughts, man. Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that's like super tough. I mean, obviously I think it's like case by case basis in terms of that, but I mean, in all honesty, like, from my perspective, it's more like someone's got to initiate it, right? Like, there's always got to be the one person initiating it. And I think if you were the person, like, in a group of three and you kind of felt like we're all doing like our own thing, but like you notice, you have to like first notice the opportunity for like a collaborative effort to like even happen that would be beneficial, right? Because collaboration is great, but it isn't always the answer to every single thing in life. Like some things are better suited for an individual to do the task, execute the task, and update the team, right? Not everything is a collaborative effort. It's just that a lot of things are, and there's uses for it. But I think like once that's noticed, I think it really just requires someone to be the leader that initiates it. And maybe you're the manager outside the situation, right? And you see that maybe you see and hear from your other team members that like they're doing a great job and they have all these ideas, but they're like super not aware of like what the other members are doing on their team. And they're all unaware of this, like between each other, right? Because they're not talking. But you know this from kind of like touching base with them and maybe like one-on-ones or your meetings with them. And I think at that point, what I would probably want to do is like whether that's, a group Teams chat or something, or having a call with them and say like, hey guys, like I've noticed all these things, right? And it seems like you guys are having X and X issues, and this person has X and X issues, and it seems like we could easily solve this by doing X, or like, and being like, it doesn't have to be that we do this, but it seems like if we could just, do these types of things together, or figure out a better way to like work together on this, that we could achieve a goal, just to at least initiate it. I don't think you can walk in and be super heavy-handed and be like, this must be done this way. You have to have like direction, but enough freedom, I think. And this is something I think Josh has also done really well from my experience, is that sort of like initial direction, but complete freedom to change it depending on what they think. And like kind of, it's almost like making them feel like they're their own boss, even though they were also given something to do in a weird way. And I think that like it instills a sort of like ownership over the problem at hand. And then I think if you can successfully do that with all the members, then I think it kind of happens naturally. But I think that's the goal, is that you have to, if it's not happening, you have to inject it and like get it like going, almost like be the initiator to get it stirring. But at some point it has to run on its own, right? You can't be a hawk monitoring your team 24/7 to make sure that collaboration's happening. You have to, from the hiring point to, managing them, you have to encourage them and figure out ways to get them involved and working with each other. So yeah, but I think like the exact specifics really rely on your people and the situation that's involved.
Yeah, I think you answered it. I think literally just initiating collaboration is forcing collaboration, really. I mean, if you think about it, and it doesn't have to be that like direct. So for instance, like myself and my business partner, we go out to eat every Thursday night, right? We almost treat it as like, like the company covers dinner, we get to hang out, chat. We kind of treat it like almost like a reward thing, but in reality, we're getting a lot of collaboration efforts that we don't get done normally throughout the week, done all at once, and it doesn't feel forced. So I probably worded it incorrectly when I said like forced, but I think you guys both put a good perspective on it, because and I'm sure, I know Josh is familiar with like probably throwing together some touch bases. Between the coaching and directing the department, throwing together just a touch base, like that's already a collaborative effort, because you're collaborating and getting feedback from a group of individuals who probably in a regular situation wouldn't even be speaking with each other. So I think just initiating is forcing, right? And even though it sounds really direct, I think that's more than enough to kind of inspire collaboration.
Well, I think you guys kind of hit it, in a roundabout way, like Shan, with even like your dinners on Thursday, right? Like what you're really talking about is building trust and relationships, right? And that fosters that collaboration, so because your business partner and you are out Thursday night, and I'm sure you're talking about business, but I'm sure other things come up, right? And you develop kind of a relationship, you build trust. And now, like to Colby's point, right? You don't have to be kind of the hawk over top of what's going on. You've handed off the recipe. You trust that the sous chef might toss a couple extra ingredients in, but it's going to be for the betterment of the meal, right? They're not, because you've got a collective vision and something that you're shooting for. You guys understand you have the same mission, same purpose, same end goal. And because of that, it doesn't necessarily matter if you follow the exact same route, as long as you wind up at the same destination.
I agree with that. And I think too, one of the things that I actually think is really smart about the touch bases that Shan was referencing, and for people who aren't aware, it's kind of like a situation where, maybe you have your direct boss or the boss above that who kind of has like a meeting with like a similar group of people in like similar positions, and they kind of like work alongside each other, and they kind of just like, it's like kind of like an open forum, just talking back and forth with everyone. And it really does end up leading to just like collaboration on maybe issues you're running into, successes that you've had that you want to make sure continue and go down the same road. So it can be a big mix of things. But one of the reasons I think that is really important, I think it's especially important for like a really younger group of workers who maybe don't have a lot of experience with collaboration, because I think it gives you the opportunity to model what it should look like, right? Because I feel like in general, like collaborating is a skill that people learn and develop over time, and they can get better or worse at it. And I think especially for younger people coming into, maybe it's their first professional job, outside of maybe working at a fast food restaurant, a grocery store, right? Like it could be a much different setting like when you get your first professional job, and kind of like being like, oh, like I don't even know what it looks like to have this type of conversation with my boss or with my coworkers. Like, I don't know how direct I should be, how indirect I should be. Like, what issues should I bring up? Like, should I bring up this problem that I had, or is that like not appropriate in this given circumstance? But then like when you start to like your boss is being like, hey, like, X, Y, and Z like poses a couple questions and is looking towards you for an answer. It kind of like was like, oh, like I have a lot of like say in like what goes on here. Like I can, give my voice and my opinion, because it's not like it's like a, safe place essentially to talk and discuss ideas. Really, it's almost like an open like philosophy discussion on the workplace essentially, and like what's going on, and like having that sort of open forum conversation. So I really like it from that modeling perspective too. Like I think it's actually how you can encourage more, or that to happen outside of those meetings in the future, because you've sort of modeled and exemplified it for them already.
Yeah, I think, kind of adding to that point, right? And I'd love to hear what you guys think about this too, but like I've been doing, I've been in the field for over 20 years now, right? And one of the things that I think is so important for me and for other people that have been around for a longer time, we have to also be open to the young folks coming in and their ideas, right? Like you talked about how they can learn from our modeling, which I completely agree with, but I think there's still a lot for us to be learning, from them as they come in, because, this is a collaborative generation that's entering the workforce. They're very committed and dedicated to like social responsibility, giving back. And those are all fantastic things. And just because, I've been doing this for a couple of decades doesn't mean I've got it completely figured out. And I can still learn a lot from new perspectives and new people coming in. And, I think that's something that's an incredible value add also. But, I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, no, I think I don't think it's necessarily that like you have a lot of people coming in with different mindsets and you're having to shift anything. I think what you see majority of the time is those who lead with open mindsets, which is probably why you haven't really felt necessarily that like you've had to change directions in the way you do things. It's just that it's constantly growing and it's never stopped, right? Like you've never felt like, at least for me, and I know we relate a lot, so at least for me, I never feel like I've even gotten close to the top of the barometer. So what I do like to kind of clear the smoke in that scenario is I like to keep things like as extremely open-minded if I can, right? Like if someone does have a different perspective, or even I might have a different perspective, like the way I think of things changes constantly. So I do hear that a lot. Like I hear a lot of people say that like the younger generation is really going to shift up things, but really like what is the younger generation? Because in reality, like you're already going through it and you're already meeting with these individuals, collaborating, like in a sense of what we just talked about. So it's whether you're going to be open-minded and make that shift ahead of time, or you're already making it.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never chosen to use a barometer as my source of record. So, I'm going to take that away from what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I could have said, yeah, I definitely could.
No, I like it. I like it. Barometer. It's good.
To me, though, that's it, right? Like if you scale yourself in a way to where like you feel like you're well-rounded and you're good, things just get more and more uncertain and unclear. Whereas like I'm just a kind of go with the flow kind of guy. So I don't know how you two kind of handle different environment changes or like collaboration with someone who might have a completely new and fresh mind. But like to me, I'm to be honest, I'm not surprised often, but I'm always impressed. Is the best way to kind of put it in my perspective.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, in terms of that dynamic between kind of like seniors and like the younger generation, like and senior in any way too, like right, like I think you could be considered like because it's really in the eye of the beholder. I feel like in this instance, because you could be, a new person in that profession. You may be older than the person that's kind of like been there for a while, but like you could see them as like a senior level person in the company due to their experience within that role or that company itself. And I think the interaction between those kind of like two separate fields is really critical, I feel like, too, because that can quickly stifle collaboration too, depending on if either side is very close-minded in their approach to working with other people. And I think it's really that key point you touched on, Josh, with just realizing that there's always something to learn, like it's curiosity, like always being interested in like what other people have to say genuinely, right? Like you can talk all the time about like, oh yeah, I'm open to being wrong, I'm open to this, I'm open to that, but I feel like unless you're curious, it's hard to even realize that you could be wrong about something. Like if you're not really curious about the world, it's hard to notice when that happens, right? And yeah, so I just think that's like super critical, and I don't even think it necessarily has to be from someone who's been within a field for 20 years. I think it oftentimes can happen with the younger individuals that are coming up, and they're like super gung ho, and they're like, I'm gonna prove everyone wrong, like I know everything, right? Like you can also have those types of individuals, and I think ultimately it just stems from it's not just curiosity, but it's also humility as well, right? Like being humble and curious about the world.
Yeah, it's like the irony. The wiser you get, the more you the less you think you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how that works out.
Yep.
And it makes me really think of like this mastermind as a whole, right? This is usually a group that's reserved for people behind closed doors. There's a fee you have to pay to be a part of it. And what we really wanted to do, obviously, was bring this to everybody and give that opportunity. Shan, I'm going to just ask you point blank, man, like, how do you see that this podcast could really help people to kind of excel with their collaboration or excel on their personal growth journeys or any goals that they have, right? Like, what are you hoping to see this podcast do for them? Since this is our first episode, I feel like we should cover that too.
Yeah. So, I mean, we mentioned earlier talking about like real life examples. I think for me anyway, the way I think everyone kind of knows what they need to do in life, or like if they have goals set in mind and they're coming across content like this, that they, in the back of their minds, they know what they want to accomplish, or they know they have goals, and it just takes some action. And usually for me, this kind of content is what stirs the pot when it comes to like taking that specific action. We all know, like in the back of our minds, we should be creating this kind of content. We should be hitting the books or just jumping in on a specific goal we might have. So like hearing other people talk about it and seeing their struggles, it might not necessarily give you the guide that you were looking for, but it'd at least like reassure in the back of that mind of you needing to go and do what you know you need to do, and just getting you closer and closer to actually doing it. And that's how I absorb content, right? I'll watch content on like specific podcasts or tutorials on something I might not even want to pursue in mind, but I like to see the creative process, right? Like I like to see where people struggled, because that's what makes them unhuman, and that's what makes them kind of vulnerable in a sense, and it gives you that reassurance of I'm going to have to go through this and just do it myself. So not to give you like a long, boring answer, but again, like to reiterate, I just think everyone knows what they need to do. It's just very confusing, and the lack of clarity is real. So content like this kind of gives you a collective space where you can, really just think about like, all right, like it's time to get at it. Let's see what Colby, Josh, and Shan might struggle with, and compare it to my own.
Yeah, and
Yep.
you hit it with the power of the mastermind, right? Because it is those different perspectives. How can we kind of like learn from each other? Because you're right, we know what to do, right? But as you're walking down the path of what you're trying to do, you're going to hit an obstacle. There's always going to be some kind of challenge that comes up or a question that arises, right? And the beauty of something like this is I'm not facing it alone, right? I get to have Shan your perspective, Colby your perspective, and it allows me to really kind of see everything from multiple angles, right? And there's so much power in that because it helps me avoid issues that maybe you face. I get to basically have the advantage of all of your knowledge and experience without having to go through the trials that led to that, right? And so it saves me a lot of headache.
Right. And, of course, you'll still go through your own set of issues and trials, but then again, you can kind of humanize it, right? Like, okay, I'm finally hitting a road gap that, or a roadblock that one of the guys on the masterminds hit, but in my own way. And it's got my own flavor on it and it feels good because now maybe I can talk about it one day. So that's constantly what runs through my mind whenever I'm consuming any kind of content. I'm telling you. I mean, we live in a world where like ChatGPT and Google will literally provide you with a how-to for anything. We all know exactly what we need to do with our specific goals. It just always comes down to like, what does it take to become a high achiever? What does it take to like actually pursue something without just saying you're going to pursue it? And I think this is where this kind of content is going to like revolutionize the entire like learning industry. Like, again, we live in a world with ChatGPT. It's not necessarily anymore like how do you do things. It's like how do you put yourself in the mindset to where you're going to get it done.
Yeah. So Colby, thinking through that a little bit, right? If this is kind of the ingredients, right, and you follow the recipe and the content that's being developed is kind of that finished meal. Like, what do you do with that now, right? Because we've talked about how we can use that collaboration to kind of put the meal together and have this fantastic feast. But like, now what do we do with that, right?
So, I mean, I guess to further elaborate even more on this analogy, I feel like as the
You brought the analogy in, man.
I know I brought it upon myself. But I guess as the consumer, literally in this analogy, I think it's everyone eats their food differently, and I think it also depends on what sort of experience you're looking for in a meal and what you want to get out of it. Say you served me a delicious meal with steak, potatoes, and asparagus. Well, I got to be honest. That asparagus may be amazing and delicious, but I'm not really into it right now. I'm not at that point where I'm not going to enjoy it. So I'm just going to focus on the steak and potatoes. Like that's what I'm looking for. And to me, that's what I think is really valuable about these sorts of conversations and podcasts is that piece of like, it's got a variety of different things that you can take from it based off of what you want out of it, like what you come in looking for, where you're at in your life, what would be the most valuable to you. Because I think for me personally, I actually have a very like the most interesting thing to me about this podcast, and the reason I would personally, want to listen to things like this is just I'm a history buff. I was a history major. I also really love philosophy in college. They're very tightly intertwined, and the reason I fell in love with it so much is it's just I realized how much I loved open forum, like principle based conversations about, how you live your life, why you choose to do it in such a manner, how different people evaluate happiness, fulfillment, what they want to do, et cetera. Like all those things are just super interesting. I just realized how interesting people are in general. And, we're all trying to figure out, how in the heck are we going to live our lives each day? Like, what do we want to do? How do we want to do it? And I think you combine that sort of thing in a podcast where people are sharing like their real experiences, good and bad, I think is really important because I think, like Shan said, it's like a lot of people know what to do, but they're also really insecure or not confident about their ability to execute on the instructions given, right? And I think listening to people talk about the tribulations that they've had going through something to get to where they're at is really important because you realize people aren't perfect. No one's perfect. And especially in a world with social media, you continually see the best depiction of someone without all the bad. And I think for me personally, it's just really important to have a really principled and thoughtful conversation combined with, showing people the stuff that you have to go through. So like you're saying, Josh, they can learn through it without having to go through it. But even if they do go through the same thing, they know that they're not alone, right? And I think that's really important because like you hear it all the time, but just kind of hearing it one more time never hurts, right? So.
No, for sure. And you said a couple things there that I think really, kind of to wrap up and conclude this analogy, right? So if you're listening to this podcast, obviously we've been hitting the recipe thing. We've been hitting that recipe concept quite a bit, quite hard. We don't do that every podcast, right? We'll come up with a new analogy. No, but one of the things that, Colby said is, right, the asparagus maybe isn't on his radar right now. He doesn't need that. But the cool thing is you can kind of take that and, my wife and I do this all the time. We'll split a plate, right? Or you can take it home with you in a to-go box until you're ready to really digest that part, right? So even if today, the content maybe isn't 100% applicable, what everyone here is doing is they're laying down a foundation for when that comes up, right? There's an old definition of luck. It's when preparation meets opportunity. And right now, I think what we're really doing is we're talking through all of the challenges to get prepared for when those opportunities arise. And, that's really how we're able to excel with each other through a group like this, through a mastermind. I just think that's fantastic.
I will just add that you can definitely tell, Colby, that Josh is a little bit older than us because he says on the air. But no, to recap what Josh said. Yeah.
Okay, barometer.
It'll make sense to some, all right? It's to some. But 100%. I really see this evolving pretty heavily, especially knowing that this is our first episode. But I am excited to see kind of the different perspectives because I really, as much as I know you two, we are so different. So there's a lot of valuable stuff for me alone. And I can't imagine anyone else who would weigh in and view themselves. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, same here. And especially the last point you brought up, Shannon, like, I think this discussion has made me realize just how we are all three, I think, at very much different points within our lives. And I think that'll make sort of our viewpoints and what we bring to the table with each sort of point of conversation really interesting. I mean, obviously, I feel like, Shan, you have all the entrepreneurial stuff that you do. Josh, even similar, and you've been within the IT industry for so long and just being a professional for so long. And, I'm relatively new to the space of IT, generally speaking, in the last few years. Obviously, I made my way up and, I'm the support lead over my current team. But, I feel like we've all had very different sort of journeys to where we're at now. And I think the differing levels of experience will be really interesting. Honestly, I'm very curious to see where we land on a lot of these topics.
And that's the power of the mastermind. And this is why we wanted to do mastermind for the masses, so everybody could take advantage. So thanks everyone for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you next week.